Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name, like Sherry said, is Cindy Stanfield. I am the Regional Workforce Lead for Northern California Coastal Region. I've been a volunteer with the Red Cross for about 3.5 years. I have a staff services, staff planning and support manager gap, and I have done staffing requests, so I guess that makes me the expert. In the last couple of classes, I noticed, well, in all the previous classes, we had some pretty heavy hitters doing the presentations and giving you really a great overview from a high level of what happens in a DR, what to expect. We're going to kind of take a step back and look at one specific task that you or someone that you work with may be asked to perform, and that's staffing requests. There's a lot that you can learn in Edge and on the Exchange about it. So my hope here is to give you some tips and tricks about what to do, what questions to ask. And this should help. Not only I see there are a lot of people that I know on the call who are probably supervisors or managers. This may help you to refresh what has happened in staff requests, and also for you to better support the people on your team in this function. So like I said, I am going to run through, and I'll go through pretty quickly the nuts and bolts of how to do a staffing request, but I'm going to start with my own story. So about 3.5 years ago, I did my first deployment. I did not have a staffing gap, but my two fantastic mentors, Peggy Pinterbossi and Jen Short, asked me to come up to the Kincaid fires in Northern California and to help out. I said yes. I went, did not know really what I was doing. I knew a lot about profile management, really nothing about staffing requests. You get there, you get to the headquarters, it's chaotic. I can tell both of my mentors, always very supportive, are being pulled in about 30 different directions. So I had to kind of rely on the people around me, ask questions when I could, and make my way through it. So hopefully what I'm going to present to you will give you a foundation of, you may not know what exactly step by step to do when you get there, but it helps you with what questions you can ask, and just know what you don't know. So I'm going to start my presentation, and I apologize, I'm not the best at these technical. Let's see. And I'm gonna, all right, somebody please give a thumbs up if you can see my, or actually come off mute because I can't see anything now.
We can see staffing requests.
Awesome. Okay, so that's, let's see. So first of all, what is a staffing request? And, you know, there's a very generic description, which is, oops, sorry about that, which is, you know, it's how we request human resources on a DR. And that's the easy part, right? I mean, that doesn't even speak to what goes on behind it, how you need to get approval, how it needs to be filled out, and what you do from there. But here is an actual, this is a blank staffing request. And you can see here that it has a place where you fill in the DR. This is the kind of stuff that you learn on Edge. You can go into the Edge training and see all of this. So I'm going to move through pretty quickly. DR, data request. This is what you, as the person entering staffing requests, will receive from an activity lead, an AD requesting new staff. The first thing that I found confusing about this form is that it is separated into, the section at the top is for in-person workers. The next section is if you're requesting virtual workers. And the third section below is if you're requesting event-based volunteers. The rest of it is pretty self-explanatory. How many people do you need? Where are they going to report? How long do you need them? When you're going to need them? And who are they going to report to? The person making the request fills in their name and signs it. If you're doing this electronically, typing in the name serves as the signature. The date, the email, their position on this DRO, and then the approver. This is a key point right here. The approver is dependent on the DR. Typically, it is the job director who needs to approve all staffing requests. However, they can delegate it to their activity leads, to the ADs. You need to know ahead of time what that approval process is on the DR that you're coming onto. Do not take for granted that the same job director from one DR to the next will have the same structure. It's dependent on the size of the DR. If it gets to be prohibitive for one person to approve all of them, that may change. It may also change within the same DR from time to time as the cadence of the event changes. It may change if you go to separate into districts. So I'm going to show you one that I filled out with just some names of, it's not a real one, but I did fill out the current New Mexico responses going on right here. And you'll see here, I only filled out because I'm only asking for virtual workers. So I put in the gap that I'm looking for. I'm looking for one worker for 10 days, starting today. I made up a name here. I did use Jane Jennings because she's my friend and I know that she's currently assigned to that DR. And so if she had made the request and she needed to get Carl Matzke, the job director, his approval for this. As with most trainings that anybody on this call has probably done in the last couple of years, we often start with saying, before COVID, it was like this, and during COVID, it was like this, and now it's kind of a hybrid. Before COVID, and with my example of being at the Kincaid Fire, everybody's sitting in headquarters. It's a big room. People walk over to you with a piece of paper. It has Carl's signature on it. You make sure everything makes sense. You have all the details that you need. You enter it in the computer, you sign your name at the bottom, and you put it in a folder that I'm done. During COVID, we had to be more creative and using some electronic communications for staff requests. So I know, for instance, the 2020 wildfires, we did it in the beginning via email, and the email sufficed as the approval from the job director or their designee. So again, you just need to know what the structure is on your DR, what they would like. Your supervisor should let you know that. You should also be able to find that usually in the IAP, and just good to know. Now, once you get this staff request, and this sounds like it's easy, right? Typically 9 times out of 10 or 90 times out of 100, there's a question on it. And then you have to go back to the person submitting the request to make clarifications. If they were unclear, if they didn't put down who somebody needs to report to, then you just let them know, well, I may have to put them that they're reporting to you. and they usually makes them want to go find who the actual supervisor is going to be. So once you have this paper filled out, and by the way, I have to give a shout out to Peggy, because when I started on my first virtual response, she gave me a great piece of advice. And that was, with the staff requests, they're all going to be coming through your email because we were virtual in the beginning of COVID. And she said, print everything out, get a bunch of highlighters, make up your own system of highlight the top or the name for it's been received, it's pending with a question, it's been entered, it's moved up, to the national door. So one of my tips and tricks is just don't let things get lost in your email, print everything out, keep yourself organized, whatever that means to you, and that so somebody could step in on your day off and make sense of what you've been doing. So now once you have the paper request and you want to go submit that in volunteer connection in disaster management. And again, you can watch the if you haven't already done so, the volunteer connection disaster management, I think it's module 2 that goes over creating new staffing requests. There have been some updates since then, so I'll talk about them now. But when you go into disaster management, and I'm not going to jinx myself by saying there are no open DRs in my region, I didn't just say that. That's why some of my fields here are gray, because there's nothing for me to select. But if you came into disaster management, you would use the drop down here to select the DR that you're assigned to, and you would click the create staffing request button or tile. And then what that will take you to, it will take you to a page that shows all of the staffing requests that have been created on that response. And then you come to, I have circled in yellow, this little plus button. That is where you will add a new staffing request. By the way, if you look at the little eyeball, the actions of the eyeball, that means that you can open it and view your entire entry or whoever entered it at that time. But we're going to click the plus button and create a new staffing request from the piece of paper in your hand. And this part is very pretty self-explanatory. You do need to select yes, no, is it a virtual assignment, the gap that you're looking for. If there are any qualifications or specialty tracks, those drop downs will appear here, and that would have been indicated on the staff request form that was submitted to you. Supervisor gap filter. This helps you to find who the supervisor may be on the DR by filtering down by their gap. You do need to enter a supervisor. This is super important because we really want to make sure that that person gets an appropriate evaluation once they're on the job. So again, if you haven't been given that information, you can circle back with the requester to find out who they would like them to report to.
Hi, Cindy. We have a question in chat I was going to ask really quickly before we go too far. What if you wanted someone that, besides being a recovery care gap, was also a recovery care instructor? Would that go in the empty task line?
In the empty task line. Oh, yes. I mean, generally people just write that right below. I can go back to the.
Thank you.
Yeah, just generally people just tend to write in any extra things that they want, any extra requirements. Yeah, it's kind of a bit loose in terms of the different things that you see, and anything that you can get, like I said, from the requester to clarify is very important. So that's great question. So we're going to go back to, all right, so the reporting location should already be entered, and you just select from them wherever the requester indicated the person would be reporting, and the work location, how many days. Then notes, this is where there may be additional notes about RC care access required, or experienced supervisor preferred, or will accept a strong SA instead of an SV. All of these things will show up to the local deployment teams when it gets put out, as we on deployment teams go out and search for those responders. So all the details do help. So now I'm going to show you how you see, once you, at the bottom of the page it said submit, it just got cut off, but you'd hit submit, and then you want to view and make sure it is on your local door. And now the door is where we see all of our requests have been posted, But when you create that request, it only goes to a local door, meaning it's only viewable by people within that region, that affected area. And so to view what those deployment teams are seeing, you come back to disaster management, you click the staffing request local, and it will look something like this. These are all the currently open positions in your region on this DR. And again, you can you need to filter down to get to the right response, that kind of thing. So the reason this is done, and this is what varies a little bit from the original EDGE training, because at the time that those lessons were created, the local door didn't exist. And so the purpose of the local door is to allow us to try to fill as efficiently as possible from our local responders. And I'm going to pause for a moment here and talk a little bit about this because it's another one of my tips and tricks that I learned. I don't know if you saw in the staffing request, I used Jane Jennings as my example. Jane is also our regional deployment lead here in NCCR, and she was on that first response with me, and I sat next to her at the computer and asked her a ton of questions. She was responsible for looking at the requests as they came in with me and seeing if we could fulfill them locally. And she would either tell me, I think we can do this, let me talk to the local teams, the local territory teams, and find if we can get these people assigned as quickly as possible. Or she would come back and say, in this instance, she'd say, you know what, I have exhausted all of our warehouse SVs that are forklift operators. So we're just not going to be able to fill that here on locally. And we're going to need to send it to RMS, our Resource Mobilization Support at National, and they are going to help us to expand our search to look beyond just our local region. And so if that is the case, and Jane told me that I needed to do that, I would come in here to the local door and I would use this up button that's circled, and that would send it to RMS. They receive that information. Oh, do you have another question for me?
We have a couple questions in chat. The first one is, on the gap or specialty track line, should we add both the gap so we know the level of general capability supervision as well as the specialty track or qualification? Many of the former IP gaps have been reduced to one gen track with a slew of specialty qualifications.
I'm not sure I'm understanding that question, and I'm going to table that one until the end, and then I'm going to ask to phone a friend.
Okay.
So, because I'm sure somebody on this call knows the answer to that.
Okay, and then we have one more. If the staffing request is for an IRV driver, does a feeding gap need to be entered also, or does it just go under qualifications?
I believe that it should be a feeding gap should be requested, and then the qualification of IRV driver. But I think that we can all, that will also that's part of the back and forth that we could have with the requester to say, well, if we can find another person to do the feeding, can we get somebody to just do the IRV? It's that's the soft, squishy part of doing staffing requests that isn't so straightforward. It's all about having conversations with the requester, making sure you're communicating through a very static process of posting to the door what really their needs are and getting it done. Because at the end of the day, that's our goal, right? It's to figure out to utilize our people the best that we can in the most efficient way. So that's a great question. I think if I had somebody that just put down IRV driver, I think I would go back and have a conversation and say, you know, do they have to have a feeding gap? Can we get somebody as, you know, to assist that has a feeding gap? Definitely, I think that would be a conversation. So I'm going to click this button because Jane told me we cannot find a forklift operator with a warehouse SV gap. I'm going to click it. It will send it to RMS. It will remove it from our local door, and there'll be a delay until they can evaluate it. And what I imagine that they're looking at is they're taking a look at the entire country and where we are with our responses, where we have certain availability, and how far they think that we need to go to find that role. So for instance, they may say, let's just keep it to the division, or let's keep it to the continental US, or let's open it up to the entire US. And at that point, they will post it to the national door. So that means deployment teams across the country will be able to see that need we have in our region. It doesn't mean that just every single deployment team can assign somebody. They have to stay within the parameters that our RMS has set for that role. So I'm going to show you real quick. I'm going back to disaster management. If you want now to view the national door, some people call it the big door. I kind of like the big door. So you want to hit fulfill staff requests. And if you're on deployment teams, you've done this many times. And you're going to see everything that is posted currently. You'll notice that there are a couple here that are restricted to division. And since I am not in the New Mexico, the division with New Mexico, I cannot assign anybody to that. But the ones that are open to anyone in the continental US, I could assign. Now, something I recommend if you are on a response as the staffing request person is to filter your national door. It helps. And the reason for that is you right now you're just really super focused on your own DR and what's being posted there. It'll keep you from getting confused. And this is what a filtered version looks like. I would simply put in my DR number in this field and hit apply, and it would only show you what's been posted. It's super important too that we are always keeping track of both the national door and the local door. That's the deployment teams, the LCV lead will need to do that to make sure that they're filling both as effectively as they can. So I'm going to stop and take a breath. And and one other thing I didn't talk about was the use of EBVs. Now, that original staffing request, it could have come through filled out at the bottom portion that it's that they're requesting EBVs. One point I would make is that if you're listening in on all the regular stand-up calls, the staffing daily calls in your role, you may hear, hey, we're getting a ton of EBVs with interest in helping. And even though something isn't specifically called out on a staffing request in that lower box for EBVs, keep it in the back of your mind, because you may see a staffing request that comes through that says up in the top section for fully in-person assigned volunteers, they're asking for 10 feeding essays. It doesn't hurt to just check either with your LCV, your EBV lead, or your supervisor and say, is this something that we really can fulfill with EBVs, rather than bringing in 10 people from potentially across the country. It's just, again, it's one of those little more of a nuanced aspect of being in this role, and just a suggestion. So definitely get to know your EBV lead as well as your LCV lead. Sherry, do we have any other questions? I can't tell if I'm going too fast or too slow.
I think you're going just the right pace, but Hillary King did come through, and she's your phone a friend, I think.
Okay.
She answered Tim's question, and I'll just rephrase say the question again so everybody understands what we're answering. On the gap or specialty track line, should we add both the gap, so we know the level of general capability supervision, as well as specialty tracker qualification. Many of the former IP gaps have been reduced to one gen track with a slew of specialty qualifications. And thank you, Hillary King. She answered, yes, be as specific as possible by including the gap and specialty you need without going overboard with specifics such that you narrow your pool too much, though in your example, that wouldn't be an issue. So thank you, Hillary.
Yes, thank you. I can always rely on you, Hillary, for a phone a friend. Yes, okay, great. So I'm going to move on now to ByName requests. I'm going to apologize for this next slide. It's a bit tiny. So ByName requests are used when and it's usually at a higher leadership level or a very unique and hard to fill position where they're requesting a specific person that they know already has the right qualifications. And usually they've talked to them ahead of time. They may be open to coming and helping. So you would receive a ByName request on the same staff request form, but instead of having just the gap listed, it would actually have the individual's name and the gap that they're being requested for. There is very specific approval required for ByName requests. It does need to be the job director, and if not, it's the RDO, the DDE, and lots of other acronyms. So it basically needs the job director or above approval for this. And we submit this differently than we would a typical staffing request. It does not get posted because we don't want it filled. We don't want people to be running around trying to fill it when we already think, one, we know who the person can be, and it's going to be a very difficult role to fill. So instead, once that ByName request is given to us and we've verified that we have all the information that we need and the appropriate approval has been given, we submit it, and it's done through a form which can be located in the staff services toolkit. And at the end, I'm going to give a bunch of resource links. So it's actually a SharePoint form, but you click the link and you get this nice gray page that comes up and you fill it out. What I learned after struggling with this for a little bit, of trying to look up divisions and whatnot, you really need to know the responder's first and last name, their region, their gap. If you cannot find their member ID number for whatever reason, usually RMS can do all of that and track it down, and will ask if they have questions, if they can't figure out specifically the person you're looking for. You put in, is it virtual, the supervisor's name and contact number. You may or may not know if they can travel in the next 24 hours. And you tell that where you want them to be assigned to. All those things are there on the drop down, and you hit save, and that sends it to RMS, who will take it from there behind the scenes, contact the responder's local region, and make sure that it all is kosher, that they're willing to go, that they have the correct gap. And then once that's done, they are assigned by RMS, and then the submitter, meaning you sitting in this role, will be notified if it's been filled or if for some reason it's been declined. And I often, when I get those staff ByName requests, I put really big BNR at the top of my page, so as I'm flipping through all my staffing requests, it just catches my eye. Let's see. So just to recap, kind of my tips and pointers. are really to know what the approval chain is when you step onto a new DR. Make sure you're keeping abreast. It could change when the job director changes. It just depends. Know the structure of your team, who your LCV lead is. That's going to be really key. They will help you also to brainstorm and find out if maybe we can't fill the position with any particular local volunteer who can deploy for the required length of time, but they would be the person that would start the conversation of maybe we could do this by shifts with local volunteers. Find out who your EBV lead is and understand what the communication process is with them. I really encourage people, if you're, if you try to attend all the stand-ups, the stand-downs, the staffing meetings usually are daily, and anything that you're invited to. It helps you to understand what's going on in the DR, and that can only be a good thing. And to keep yourself organized, again, folders, highlighters, that all helps. Ask questions while you're on the DR, but also choose your time, choose your moments carefully. People can be extremely pulled in all different directions, and you don't want to make the wrong choices, but then again, you don't want to interrupt another train of thought. So Sherry, do you have another?
We have just some great back and forth going in the chat that I want to be part of the recording. Michael, or actually I should say, we had someone ask, is the ByName request available electronically in Volunteer Connection? And Michael answered, this is a live document that is open from a hot link in the Staff Services Toolkit on the Exchange. And we had a thank you. And then Autumn adds, I've heard it both ways, but who do you put in as the name of the requester? The staffing person or the activity person who made the request?
I have always put in the person who is making the request. And I feel free if anybody on this call would correct me otherwise.
You're right on track. That's perfect.
Awesome. Okay, and then as somebody mentioned about the ByName request form, so some resources, and when I will create a PDF of this presentation, I'll have the links in it that we can send out to everyone. Finding the Staff Services Toolkit on the Exchange is a great resource. In there, you will find a link to the ByName request form. One of my I didn't put it in my tips, but I recommend that people bookmark both the ByName request and the Staff Services Toolkit, so you have it really easily at your fingertips. The staff request form and the instructions are also located there in the toolkit, along with a ton of other information. One thing is that when I mentioned about the local door and the big door, that there's a job tool for that was updated in 2019 to help include those processes. You won't find that in the toolkit, but it is a separate job tool. And I have a link for that as well. And then probably the greatest resource of all is Disaster Staffing Center at redcross.org. I know that I think it was Nina who talked about the confusion of very similar sounding emails for support. And I always remember it is that for me, when I'm working in a staff request, it's RMS is the center of my universe. So I always remember that it's Disaster Staffing Center. That's how I remember that I'm going to the right email. But they are both groups are very gracious about letting you know if you've emailed the wrong group and getting you pointed in the right direction. And so I'm going to stop now. And any questions and or discussions, because I know we have a ton of experience on this call. And if anybody with that experience, would like to come off of mute and just share any wild stories that they've had. I do believe in, for those of you on the Central Coast, Cal Poly's motto is learn by doing. I think that really should be the Red Cross motto sometimes, because we learned so much from each other. So I'm going to end my slideshow and just kind of open this up, because I think, like I said, I think that's where a lot of our benefits come from.
We have a little bit of back and forth in the chat. Autumn says, I believe there should be an electronic version of the ByName request, so it's easier to get the information you need without people adding names, numbers, and needed info in the borders of the staff request form. And Michael responded, I always download a copy of the ByName request for use by the DR to request.
Oh, that's a good tip. I like
Great
that.
tip.
Yeah. Great. I can start looking at the chat now myself, now that I'm. Let's see. Anybody like to share anything else with the group or questions? All right. Well, I did promise Susan that I would end on time, but I think I just maybe had too much caffeine and I spoke much more quickly than I needed to. I think, just to recap one more time, I don't know how I can say it enough, is that staff requests, when you learn it in Edge, it sounds easy, and it is easy. It's a mechanically somewhat easy task. The hard part are the soft skills and the calling people. I was constantly on the phone. I'll talk a little bit about if you're doing the, what the status of your DR is for how you submit the staff request, because again, we're back in person, kind of. The staff request person usually should be, but when we were virtual, email was sufficient, and the requester would send the request up the chain, and when it finally get to the final approver, they would hit reply all and say approved, but then there would be nothing attached to it because they didn't realize you need to hit forward to get the document to actually come with it. So I spent many days just simply saying, when you hit reply, the file doesn't come with it. Later in early 2021, we did start using in NCCR a form builder method of submitting staff requests that way. And that, in combination with a spreadsheet, it allowed people to see in real time how their request was in process of getting approved and posted. It allowed the job director to go in and she could just approve things in one big spreadsheet. So again, don't make any assumptions. When you go to, especially outside of your own region, they may have their own process. They may have come up with something fantastic that you can bring back home and to help us improve our best practices. Let's see, I thought I saw a chat pop up.
We have a couple. So one is emailing the requester when the request is posted on the door needed when an in-person DR?
It's emailing the requester when the request is posted on the door. For instance, if I am the staffing request person, I receive the request, I post it, do I go back and ask and let that person know it's up there? It could be a courtesy. It also may not be very feasible to do that. Generally, the ADs are all kind of given the updates, so they should know and be in their leadership meetings where they can talk to the AD workforce and know how the different requests are progressing. It could get really it could get really burdensome, I think, for the person doing staffing requests to always circle back.
Thank you. And then Autumn commented, thank you to Michael for the tip. And she added, this was in response to the ByName Request form and how it was used on a DR. Autumn said, thanks. And they ended up creating a Word doc with questions so people could fill that out. So
I'm gonna steal that one.
Yeah.
For sure.
And Peggy added, the information is on the AD report now. And I think that was in regards to the request that you were speaking of.
Yep, absolutely.
Any other questions for Cindy while we have her on the line today?
All right. Well, you feel free to reach out to me. I'll drop my my email in the chat, and I'm happy to talk staff requests at any time.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing your expertise. Thank you all for joining us on the call today. I'll be sharing the recording out probably later this afternoon or tomorrow, so you can share it out with anyone who wasn't able to make the call today. Thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. It's a Thumbs Up Thursday. Woohoo!
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.